Welcome back to But This Time It's Different, the show where we unpack chaos in the markets, tech, geopolitics, with an eye permanently raised. I'm Sinead, defense economist, investor, and someone who now has officially had a diamond smuggler at her dinner table.
And I'm Alex, a technology and finance writer, and someone whose entire jewelry collection consists of discarded USB sticks. And today we are talking about something sparkly, sinister, and globally misdeclared on customs forms.
So I had a dinner party last week, small group, quirky people, mostly chefs, food adjacent weirdos. Actually, Alex, you were invited and did not come. You missed a really fun party. But unbeknownst to me, one of these chefs were halfway through a conversation and he tells us all that he actually used to work as a diamond smuggler in the Congo.
I mean, which of us has not?
So yeah, over dessert, he kind of casually explains that the key to moving illicit diamonds across borders is actually really simple, unbeknownst to any of the rest of us, and it is to never make eye contact with the customs officers. So always choose a border guard who looks like they've had a really long day and get your diamonds across.
Yeah, so either criminal advice or the start of a Wes Anderson film.
Maybe both, but either way, it sent me down a really crazy rabbit hole this week. And what I found is absolutely insane, a little bit worse than I expected, and much, much shinier.
Yes, so today we are digging into the underworld of diamonds, how they're smuggled, why they're valuable, and why the entire industry is basically held together with bribes, lies, and paperwork written in pencil.
Because diamond smuggling isn't actually just a glitch in this weird system, it is the system. So let's get into it. And I want to start with this kind of crazy but very dangerous truth, especially in this global industry. Diamonds are not actually that rare. Not geologically, not industrially, and not in any kind of real world physical sense. It's just carbon. The same kind of stuff as pencil lead that is compressed over time and has heat added. More than 140 million carats actually are mined globally every year, which is enough to give everyone in the UK a diamond and still have loads left over for, I don't know, like the Kardashians' watches and their dogs' watches.
But you'd never know this from the marketing, and it turns out a lot of this is down to a company called De Beers, who actually technically funded quite a lot of my education, so thanks guys. But since the late 19th century, De Beers, which was one of the original cartels, has controlled the trade in diamonds quite aggressively. So at its peak, De Beers controlled over 90% of the world's diamond production, and it was very clever at essentially not selling everything it mined and holding it back. They stockpiled billions in rough stones in London, Johannesburg, and Geneva. So this scarcity wasn't natural or discovered. It was almost entirely engineered from day one.
Yeah, and that fake scarcity is actually what makes diamonds ideal for smuggling, because now you have this kind of high value item. It's small, very durable, and largely undetectable, and the prices are artificially inflated thanks to this kind of century of supply suppression and, well, very good ad campaigns that basically rewrote human courtship.
Yeah, they turned a rock into a moral obligation, leaving generations of men both confused and significantly poorer than they needed to be.
Well, Alex, I'm going to leave you more confused than you were 5 seconds ago. You probably haven't seen it, but one of my favorite movies ever is called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which is an absolute masterpiece. You should watch, although I suspect that you're never going to.
I actually really like rom-coms because they have a really predictable narrative arc, which means, you have like boy meets girl, boy and girl don't get on initially. They then like each other, understanding, get back together, credits roll. And I find that very comforting in an ever-changing world. So I might actually watch it.
Okay, well, you just described How to Lose a Guy in 10 days, but there's this thing in the middle of it, this side story, and it's this ad campaign around the slogan, Frost Yourself. Kate Hudson is wearing a yellow silk dress. Actually, a friend of mine for her prom had the same dress remade when we were 16, and she's dripping in diamonds that are supposed to be kind of casual. And this Frost Yourself is very similar. It's based on the story of De Beers. So that's how deep the marketing from De Beers went. They didn't just sell jewelry, they sold identity, and they're still selling these main plot twists that we put into the movies today.
Let me guess, does someone get dumped in a very expensive restaurant?
Kind of, yeah. And also emotionally outmaneuvered by this woman who weaponizes cosmopolitan advice columns, pretending, or at least hoping, to be one day a geopolitical analyst. But anyway, the movie aside, the point is that by the early 2000s, diamonds were so locked in as symbols of status, commitment, and wealth. And this is despite having almost no resale value and absolutely no intrinsic rarity, which makes them perfect for the topic of today's podcast, which is illicit trade.
But it makes sense when you think about it. So if you have a small pouch of rocks, it can be worth $500,000. No one can trace it. The price is a perfect case study in the subjective theory of value, aka it's basically narrative. Then, congratulations, you've created the most smuggleable commodity on the planet.
Yeah, and smugglers want density. They want portability, high margins, of course, who doesn't? They want something that crosses borders in a sock, gets laundered in Dubai, shows up in a Tiffany's window without any red flags, and diamonds are perfect for this.
Not just a girl's best friend, but also a warlord's retirement plan.
So, to understand how diamond smuggling really works, you need to picture it like a relay race, only with fewer batons and kind of more uncut stones taped to people's thighs. And there are five main players in the chain. Each one adds value, or depending on how you look at it and how cynical you are, and we're pretty cynical on this show, opacity.
Yeah, so I think at the very bottom of the chain, you have the artisanal miner, which is not an Italian person lovingly growing estate bottled olive oil. It's in fact small scale, informal digging in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Angola, Central African Republic, and Zimbabwe. Often it's a man, or more accurately, often a teenager with a shovel or a sieve.
And actually, there are over 1.5 million artisanal diamond miners globally, many of them living below the poverty line, many working without contracts, legal protections, or even that shovel that you talked about, Alex. Day's yield might be one small stone if they're lucky. And how much do these artisanal miners make? Like most of the time, less than $3 a day, depending on what they find. And obviously, if they find nothing, they make nothing. And they very rarely get to keep what they find.
And things begin to get murkier if they weren't murky already, because most of these artisanal mining sites are protected, euphemism of the episode, by a local power broker. You always see these terms in like writing about politics. I always wonder how you get the job of local power broker. But in this case, it's usually a militia, a corrupt police unit, or a private landholder who controls access. And they usually take a 50 to as much as 80% cut of anything that's found. And unsurprisingly, in some of the markets we described, this is not enforced by traditional contract, but with AK-47s.
These people are getting up to 80%, but they're not mining and they're not selling anything. They're literally just threatening the miners with violence, and in return, they get to own the stones. And so I guess in this case, you could maybe even argue that the AK-47s are more valuable than diamonds, but they either sell directly to buyers, or if you're like my friend, my dinner party, they're passed off to a smuggler who is usually operating under the protection of a political or military figure.
That's the problem with AK-47s. They don't feature as the centerpiece of enough 90s rom-coms. So next up, yes, as you alluded to, we have
Alex,
the
we can change this.
Yeah, the vibe shift everyone's been talking about. But yes, like you mentioned the smuggler, which is, sometimes known as the courier or a runner. It turns out, as well as running guns, you can run diamonds. And this is the person whose job it is to move the diamonds physically across the border. They're usually someone with a backpack or a motorbike, or, with apologies to any diplomats listening, a diplomatic passport. They can be local or flown in, and they're either paid with a flat fee or a 5 to 10% cut of the value they move.
Okay, so this is the stuff that we're actually interested in. How much do these guys make? Let's talk numbers. So let's say a courier or runner or a smuggler is moving $500,000 worth of uncut diamonds, which could be anything, let's say 1,000 carats at $500 per carat wholesale. They will be paid $25,000 to $50,000 for that one trip. Now, sometimes they own the stones, which was in the case of my friend at dinner, or they bought them from the mine using cash, fuel, mobile phones as payment. But usually they're just the middleman, and their job is simply to get the rocks from point A to point B without getting caught.
And you can do this through a few different methods. You can hide it in clothing, sew it in bags. You mentioned it before, taping to the thighs, or hidden in rosaries, chocolate boxes, or body cavities, which we won't think about. And yeah, there's a reason diamonds are known as the most smuggleable commodity on Earth. And you mentioned one smuggler that you knew, and he sounded like a kind of relatively professional character. There was this guy who was a couple of years below me at university. If you wanted to kind of do a stereotype of a sort of clueless posh Englishman, he 100% was. He ended up getting wrapped up in smuggling gold to and from Zimbabwe. I'm not entirely sure how, but he would just put it in his suitcase and hope that no one would search it. And
It could happen to the best of us, Alex. We may
see,
accidentally end up being smugglers ourselves
I, I, I,
one day.
I don't think he realized the risk he was taking on, and he definitely didn't ask for enough money. But don't think he was ever caught. You know, hope he's
He
doing
was a
well.
badly paid smuggler. Well,
Yeah.
once the smuggler crosses into a safer country, so let's say they're leaving the Congo and they're usually moving to somewhere like Uganda, Cameroon, Namibia, South Africa, they hand the stones to another broker, sometimes called a fence. Now, this person's job is to launder the origin of the stone. So this could mean mixing smuggled stones into parcels of legal ones, paying off a Kimberley certifying officer to stamp them as clean, or even sending them offshore to a diamond trading hub with zero questions asked.
If you're wondering what we mean by Kimberley certifying, don't worry, we're going to come back to that later. But to the offshore hub you mentioned, the main one in the world by far is Dubai. And the Dubai Multi-Commodities Center is the world's fastest growing diamond trading zone. In 2022, it handled over $37 billion in diamonds, which is up from just 5 million 20 years earlier. And there are a few different factors behind that explosion. One, there's no import or export tax. Great. You get to keep your legitimately gotten gains as a businessman. There are no disclosure requirements, so good for the local power brokers. There's no need to verify the source origin, and the authorities there, it's fair to say, have a relatively liberal approach to enforcement.
Yeah, this is the world's most efficient ethics vacuum. So you walk in with your blood diamonds, you walk out with your paperwork, job done.
Once you are done and dusted in Dubai, the clean diamonds are sent to India, especially Surat, where they're cut and polished. And India now processes over 90% of global diamonds by volume. They're then exported to the US, EU, or China, often via Belgium and Israel, and sold to wholesalers, retailers, and ultimately to you. And what I would say, Sinead, is you keep talking about, deglobalization and the breakdown of international supply chains, but this seems to be one that's doing pretty well.
Yeah, well, we're going to do another episode on how well the diamond industry is doing. But as of right now, these single diamonds have made it through like 20 million countries by the time they land in your blue Tiffany box in New York. Let's imagine 5 countries, at least 3 intermediaries, and 0 questions usually asked. So everyone has this kind of plausible deniability and everyone gets paid. And honestly, now I know why diamonds are so expensive, because there's 8,000 million illegal people in the middle of this. But importantly, the person who actually mined the diamond, they are still broke. They're getting paid nothing.
And everyone in this chain has a financial incentive to ensure that it doesn't turn into a long read in the FT, because you've obviously got the militia that profits from the tax and the extortion, the courier that gets a commission and has no overhead, the broker who gets paid in cash, the refinery that makes the fees, and then the retailer which gets to sell you a high margin ethical diamond.
Now, they might not get a long read in the FT, Alex, but they are getting a mention on our extremely popular podcast.
It's over for them. It's over.
It's over for the smugglers. So the risks here, they don't get caught often, but if a courier gets caught, they could lose everything. And depending on which country that's in, that could be your livelihood or an arm or your life. If a Dubai broker accidentally certifies conflict diamonds, they might get a warning. They might go back to lunch and it's kind of all forgotten about. So there's a real continuum of risk here.
Yeah, so what it actually sounds like you're saying to me, Sinead, is that in cold economic terms, smuggling diamonds is actually the ultimate rational activity.
I mean, it seems to be a good business, but by now we've kind of talked about how the diamond travels from the dirt, dug out by an underpaid or not at all paid miner in the Congo, to a velvet box in Manhattan via bribes and brokers and some sort of border crossings and motorbikes. And, you might be thinking, as we are recording this in Europe and many of our listeners are European, someone is surely regulating all of this. Well, yes, and Also, no. So enter the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, launched in 2003. We mentioned it earlier, and it's this kind of global effort to stop conflict diamonds, the ones that are used to fund civil wars and these armed insurgencies, from entering the legitimate market. So 80 plus countries signed on to this Kimberley process, and each diamond shipment would now need a government issued certification of origin. So the industry, after all of this, we're going to certify and we're going to have these certificates. They get to say, we fixed it. Ethics achieved. Tick the box. Please continue proposing to your loved ones in New York.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great in theory, but in practice, both our listeners will not be shocked to hear that the Kimberley process is, in fact, a complete fucking joke. Like, a very expensive, elaborate one with lots of bits of paper. But, here's how it actually works. So let's say, parcel of diamonds is mined in Zimbabwe. It gets to Dubai and receives its conflict-free certificate. Well, how does it get the certificate? Well, a piece of paper signed by a government official. They don't audit anything. They don't inspect any sites. There's no third-party verification of any kind. It is literally just vibes and a stamp. That is it.
I'm confused, Alex. Are you trying to tell me that these local governments that are certifying certificates that they make money from are not doing their job correctly?
It's like the audit profession.
Yeah, there's really no difference between this and KPMG at this stage. But the definition of conflict diamond is actually also incredibly narrow. It only applies to diamonds that are funding rebel movements that aim to overthrow legitimate governments. And honestly, by the time you get down that rabbit hole, and most of the time the person certifying the diamond is in somewhat involved in any of these overthrowing processes anyway. So if a diamond is mined by a government that uses forced labor, child workers, or even military intimidation, the AK-47s are back, as this has happened repeatedly in Zimbabwe, that's totally fine. So these are still clean, they're still exportable, and yeah, they're going straight into your Cartier Eternity band.
Yeah, and well, what about if the country's sanctioned? But yeah, again, you'll be shocked to hear there's a workaround. And this actually did happen with the Central African Republic in 2013. Smugglers just moved the stones across the border into Cameroon, and they suddenly stopped being sort of sanctioned dirty stones from the Central African Republic. They were Cameroonian magically, or you just send a friendly certified into Dubai who mixes them with other parcels and signs off without asking any questions. So it's the diamond version of money laundering. You just don't need to create a shell company. It's actually even easier than most money laundering.
Yeah.
If you can't do this, it's a skill issue.
I mean, my friend at the dinner party seemed to think it was pretty simple. So none of this is theoretical. This has obviously all been well documented. We've all seen the movies, which should be the source of all of our knowledge. And in fact, a 2015 report by the Enough Project found that despite this Kimberley so-called ban, the Central African Republic exported an estimated $24 million in diamonds over just a few years, much of it laundered through neighboring countries and, of course, Dubai. And you would think this would spark reform, right? So some sort of tightening of the rules or someone saying, hey, maybe this isn't working so well. But instead, in 2011, Global Witness, one of the NGOs that helped create the Kimberley process, pulled out of that process completely. They said, and I quote, the Kimberley process has become an accomplice to diamond laundering. So when your founding ethics partner quits, that's not a red flag. That's actually the entire flagpole being on fire.
Yeah, obviously the industry didn't care. And I sort of jokingly mentioned audit before, but I actually think there's something in this. Is a lot of people think the job of the audit industry is to find fraud in public companies or mistakes. And that's not the job of the audit industry. The job of the audit industry is to look at it and go, we'll just about not get sued for signing this off. And like the Kimberley process is sort of the same thing. Like it's not actually designed to stop illicit diamonds. It's designed to allow all of its participants to have plausible deniability if anyone asks any questions. So the mine owner can say, we're certified. The trader can say, we complied. The retailer can say, our stones are conflict free. And the consumer set can say, well, I only buy diamonds that are marked ethical. And yeah, everyone gets to sleep at night.
So I want to talk about the numbers quickly because these are also astonishing. In 2022, the global diamond trade was worth roughly $90 billion. So before we made this podcast, I tried to think about and size this number in my head. And no, I did not get to $90 billion. This is absolutely way bigger than I thought it would be. But 20 billion of that came from rough diamonds, these kind of uncut, unpolished stones. And the UN estimates that between 20 to 25% of those diamonds are illicit in origin, so either smuggled, misclassified, or tied to violence. So, in the grand scheme of things, that's 1 in every 4 diamonds. And something to think about the next time someone says that their ring is clean, there's no possible way they could know that.
Yeah, it's just compliance theatre at its most elegant. You get reassurance instead of verification, and it keeps the industry moving. Like, as you said, the Kimberley process isn't a shield against abuse. It's a really, really good example of how a system learns to pretend.
So I want to recap quickly because we have an industry that was built on this kind of opacity in these supply chains that no one really understands, although we have, dear listeners, all 2 of you, gotten to the bottom of it. It is enforced by violence and is cleaned by nothing but paperwork and wrapped up in, this box eventually sold for way more than it's worth. Who's actually making the money here? And of course, we've already said it is not the kid in Sierra Leone that is holding a sieve while someone points an AR-15 at him. It is not the man in Angola breaking rocks with his bare hands, and it is definitely not the woman walking 8 hours to sell a handful of gravel to some broker who will tell her that it's worthless.
I'm shocked to hear that the real profits actually come downstream. We mentioned Dubai. They obviously get a percentage of everything that passes through. With India and Surat, the Indian diamond industry is now worth $25 billion, even though the cutters themselves earn less than $7 a day. And yeah, as we mentioned before, we then have the whole globalized supply chain.
Yeah, which means Antwerp, Ramat Gan, New York, Hong Kong. These are all the big kind of legacy trading centers. And here the brokers operate in extremely tight knit circles, family businesses, often multi generational, dealing in millions of dollars in loose stones. And most transactions are really still done by handshake and trust and not written in contract. And these are the brokers who don't ask where it came from, not because, they're trying to be malicious in any way, but this is just how the system works and how it's always worked. And, I grew up in South Africa and I have met many of the people involved in the diamond industry and the diamond trade. And it kind of is just like this. You might go to their house for dinner and there might just be bags of diamonds lying around, which seems like an insane thing to say, but this is just how it is. A stone here, a stone there, 10% for you, 10% for me. Very loosey goosey.
Yeah, and of course, let's not forget the financiers here. So we've got Swiss banks and Israeli holding companies, and they've, for a very long time, loved using diamonds as portable stores of value. They're great for collateral, offshore transfers, or discrete asset protection because they don't trigger reporting requirements in the same way that cash does. They're not traced in the way that real estate is. And yeah, if you're rich enough and you're in the right part of the world, if you walk through an airport with a few $1 million worth in your coat pocket, on the way to the right lounge, no one is going to stop you.
Can I just bring back our favorite airline here? This is not on your way to get your Ryanair flight. But while we're naming names, and there really should be, there might be, but I have not seen it yet, a movie about this guy, Lev Leviev, known as the King of Diamonds, who built a multi-billion-dollar empire with direct supply chains from Angolan mines, of course, reportedly, allegedly linked to state-backed corruption, labor exploitation, and off-the-books payments. Please don't sue us, Lev.
Yeah, Lev. We're sure Lev denies all of this and that he's really nice to children and animals, just for balance.
Well, just not journalists, because when they investigated him, he sued them extensively because narrative control in this industry is just as valuable, I would say even more valuable than supply chain control.
So now we've mapped the diamond supply chain from like pit to pouch, from border to boutique, and yeah, we should touch a little bit on who gets harmed. Obviously, as we've alluded to, the children, the workers being conscripted into breaking rocks and sieving things and earning no money. I think they're obviously like quite high up on our pyramid of harms. It's not great. Then you follow the route, and so you have like the border guards. Some of them are being bribed, and maybe the bribe is nice, but a lot of them are also being threatened. And a lot of the kind of officials, especially at the lower end of the chain, are also being forced to choose between corruption and survival. So like communities are hollowed out by a trade that moves through them but never for them.
Yeah, and it kind of doesn't just end at the smuggler. it keeps going, because when I met my diamond smuggling friend at my dinner party, I kind of just assumed it was like 1 or 2 step process, but it's really not. And every layer of this chain is built to obscure the people who bleed and who really have suffered for these diamonds to get out of these African mines. And by the time a diamond hits a retailer's hand, the origin story has been washed, polished, notarized, certified, and there are no questions, and there's no memory of the supply chain that has gotten it there.
Yes, and ultimately that is the brilliance of smuggling as design. It doesn't just move goods, it moves guilt away from the buyer, up the chain, and out of sight. And it does make me wonder, Sinead, next time you hold a dinner party, are you going to screen your guests a little better?
Well, this guy was actually really fun. So no, and he currently works as a chef. So we did not know that he was one of these crazy diamond smugglers. But yeah, it certainly made for interesting dessert conversation when the private equity guests around him were asking about cavity movements. That is it for this time on, but this time it's different. If you like the episode, I don't know, like give it to a friend or something. We are trying to scale from 2 to 5 listeners in the next month.
Yeah, and we'll see you next time. And if you ever get invited to a party at Sinead's house, do ask where exactly the ingredients were sourced from. Bye.